The 1998 World Rally Championship saw a close contest for the title between the Mitsubishi of Tommi Mäkinen and the Toyota of Carlos Sainz. The pair would push each other to the absolute limit throughout the year, with the pair pushing each other so hard that they would often crack into a mistake, which would often lead to dramatic consequences. The pair would duke it out all the way to the final round, where only 2 points would separate them. However, the finale in Great Britain would end up being memorable in the strangest way possible. However, before we get to that moment, let's look through the entire season to see how we got to this point. The 1998 season would mark the second year that the series would use the World Rally Car regulations, barring Mitsubishi, who like in 1997, would yet again use a modified Group A car, something that would catch them out in the future, as mentioned in a video I made about Tommi Mäkinen's 2001 season, which you can check out in the card on the top right. But given this was 1998, using a modified Group A car was still a viable option at the time, and going into the season, many people expected that Tommi would once again retain his title. However, just like in 1997, he would have stiff competition from his main rivals again, which were Colin McRae, who was entering his final year with Subaru before moving to Ford in 1999, and Carlos Sainz, who after driving for Ford in both 1996 and 1997, would return to Toyota in 1998, this time driving a Corolla instead of the Celica. The season would consist of 13 rounds, originally 14 after Indonesia was cancelled due to political unrest, and the first of these 13 rallies would take place as per usual in Monte Carlo. After a cautious start due to illness, Tommi would lead the rally at the end of day 1 and would have a massive lead of over a minute ahead of Carlos Sainz. And it was looking like already after day 1 that Tommi would stamp his authority and kick off the defence of his title with a dominant win. However, on day 2, all of Tommi's hard work would go down the drain, as on the first stage of day 2, Tommi would take too much speed on an icy patch and would crash down into a ditch, ending his rally in the process. This in turn handed the lead to Sainz, and despite a few hairy moments, he would keep hold of the lead right until the end of the rally to take the first win of 1998 and the Corolla's first ever win in WRC, winning by over 40 seconds ahead of Juha Kankkunen's Ford Escort, with Colin McRae rounding out the podium in third. For Tommi, it was a case of what might have been had he anticipated the icy patch beforehand. But luckily for Tommi, he would bounce back at the next rally in Sweden, as after local hero Thomas Radström crashed out of the lead on day 2, Tommi would take full advantage to cruise to his first win of the season, winning by over 50 seconds ahead of Carlos Sainz, who managed to pip Juha Kankkunen into second. Neither of the title contenders would finish in Kenya, with Mäkinen and McRae retiring thanks to a mechanical issue, while Sainz would retire thanks to a broken rear suspension. Both McRae and Sainz would bounce back at the next rally in Portugal, with McRae just taking victory ahead of Sainz by 2.1 seconds. However, for Mäkinen, it would end up being another disastrous rally, as he would crash out on stage 12, making it 3 retirements in the first 4 rallies, and leaving him 12 points behind championship leader Carlos Sainz. Thankfully for Mäkinen, he would bounce back in the next rally in Spain, which ended up being the debut for the Lancer Evo 5, with him grabbing a 3rd place finish behind Didier Auriol and future teammate Freddie Loix, whilst for both McRae and home hero Sainz, it would end up being a nightmare rally, with McRae, who was already struggling, retiring thanks to a broken rear shaft, whilst McRae would finish outside the points in 7th after a mistake on day 3, which left him with a puncture. Mäkinen, as a result, would gain a little bit of ground on Sainz in the standings. However, at the following tarmac event in France, it would come crashing down to earth again, as Tommi would make it 4 retirements in 6 rallies as a result of torrential rain making its way into the engine of his Mitsubishi. Luckily for Mäkinen, he wouldn't lose any ground to Sainz in the standings, as for the second rally in a row, he would finish outside of the points thanks to once again sustaining a puncture. But whilst he wouldn't lose ground to Sainz, he would lose ground to McRae, who would take a dominant victory around the French mountains to take the lead in the championship by 2 points ahead of Sainz, with Mäkinen, who was down in 6th, being a further 8 points adrift. But the next rally in Argentina would see Tommy back to his best, with him taking a dominant win ahead of Sainz, who was just able to fend off second from Juha Kankkunen after a close fight on day 3. For Colin McRae, however, he would end up finishing in 5th, losing the lead in the standings to Sainz after hitting an unsighted rock on day 2, which broke the rear right suspension arm. But in typical Colin McRae fashion, both he and co-driver Nicky Griss would display some brilliant initiative thinking, with them deliberately giving themselves a puncture in between stages in order to remove a tyre, and then would use a rock on the side of the road to reshape and fix the broken rear suspension arm, which took Subaru's director David Lapworth aback as to how on earth they were able to fix it. If you wanted proof as to why Colin was so popular with the fans, that right there was an example. And another reason why he was so popular was also down to his speed, as at the following rally in Greece, McRae, after a close fight with Didier Auriol, which ended thanks to the Frenchman damaging a circuit breaker, would come through to take his 3rd win of the season, whilst Carlos Sainz would finish down in 4th after issues with his power steering during the final day, whilst Tommy Mäkinen would once again retire from the rally, this time not even making it to the end of the first stage due to an issue with his engine. This, as a result, put him 12 points adrift of McRae, who retook the lead in the standings, while Sainz was 5 points behind McRae in 2nd. The next rally in New Zealand was a rally that Tommy wasn't keen on, given he had crashed out of the rally in the previous 3 years, and so with that in the back of his mind, combined with him also only finishing 3 rallies so far, Tommy drove a cautious rally in order to get to the finish, which ended up paying off for him, as he would end up finishing the rally in 3rd, taking advantage of others' misfortunes, including Colin McRae, who after fighting for the lead would make a costly error on day 2, which ended up breaking his steering and saw him finish down in 5th. But taking advantage was Carlos Sainz, who after a close fight with teammate Auriol, which went all the way to the final stage, would take his 2nd win of the season, once again retaking the lead in the championship. Mäkinen's podium would see him move up to 3rd in the standings, but 13 points adrift from Sainz with 4 rallies to go. And so, if Mäkinen wanted to have any chance of making it 3 in a row, he would need to drive like crazy in the next few rallies. And you know the script by now when I say something like that, that is exactly what he did, as in the next 3 rallies, he would win all 3 of them, taking a comfortable win at his home rally of Finland, then edging home hero Piero Liatti to take victory at San Remo, and then after dramas on day 1 which saw him out of the points, and also initially having a 1-minute time penalty for a jump start that would then get rescinded after an appeal, Tommy would produce a champion's drive in Australia to make it 3 wins in a row to keep his title challenge alive heading into the finale. Sainz, meanwhile, would produce some consistent results in these 3 rallies, taking 2 second place finishes and a 4th place finish in San Remo to ensure that he had a strong shot of winning the title as well. However, for Colin McRae, he wouldn't be so fortunate, as despite holding off Sainz in San Remo to finish 3rd, despite getting 2 punches during the rally, he would crash out on day 1 at Finland, and then as it was looking good for him to win in Australia, Colin on the penultimate stage would blow up his turbo, with smoke billowing out the back of his car, which in turn saw him finish down in 4th. This meant, as a result, and with Tommy and Carlos picking up strong results, Colin in his final year with Subaru was officially out of the title fight. And so, heading into the finale in Great Britain, Mäkinen, after not leading the championship at all throughout the season, would lead the standings by 2 points ahead of Sainz, with the momentum in his favour after taking 3 wins in a row. But little did we know that the title decider would end up being a classic in the weirdest way possible. The Rally of Great Britain would once again set the stage for the final round of the World Rally Championship, and with how topsy-turvy this season was, it was a mystery as to who would come out on top between Mäkinen and Sainz. But it's safe to say, the fans definitely didn't expect the championship to conclude in the way that it did. After initially being ahead of Sainz after stage 2, Mäkinen would struggle in the next 2 stages and find himself down in 10th, while Sainz found himself up in 2nd behind leader Colin McRae, who, it's worth noting, had his brother Alistair as his teammate for that weekend. Then on stage 5, Tommy's championship hopes would take a hammer blow, as on the first run of the Millbrook stage, Tommy would stumble across a patch of oil on the road and lose control of the car, smashing the rear into a concrete block and damaging his rear suspension, leaving him on 3 wheels for the rest of the stage. Tommy would try and limp it back on 3 wheels for the next couple of stages before service, however the UK law had other ideas and Tommy had no choice but to retire from the rally. And with Carlos still in 2nd after the stage, even despite nearly getting caught out by the same oil patch, he was now in prime position to take his 3rd world title, whilst Tommy was left distraught about the accident and could only hope that something happened to Carlos in the remaining 2 days for him to retain his title. The top 3 would remain the same after day 1, with McRae leading the rally by 3.6 seconds ahead of Sainz, despite once again having a puncture during the rally, whilst his brother Alistair was a further 6/10 behind Carlos in 3rd. But Carlos could afford to drop a couple of more places, as with Tommy being out of the rally and with the Super Rally rules not being a thing yet in the WRC, Carlos just needed to finish 4th as a result of Tommy having more wins than him to claim his 3rd world title. The second day would take place around the Wales Forest stages, and with how tricky the Muddy Gravel stages are, the leaderboard would continue to change throughout the day, with the likes of Richard Burns and Didier Auriol getting themselves up the leaderboard, whilst both Colin and Alistair McRae would struggle during the day. But whilst Alistair would tumble down the order, Colin would keep himself towards the front, and despite briefly losing the lead to a charging Richard Burns, he would regain the lead again by the end of stage 19. However, during the final service of the day, Colin's rally would sadly come to an end, as whilst making his way back to service, Colin's engine would blow up, losing a cylinder in the process, and despite the Subaru crew's best efforts, the engine refused to come back to life. This allowed Burns to lead the rally again after day 2, whilst Carlos Sainz, who was driving a cautious rally at this point, even despite a massive scare on the final stage, would finish the day in 4th after teammate Auriol would retire on the same stage due to an issue with his engine. And with him having a 1-minute cushion over 5th place Bruno Cherry, if he could keep this up on day 3, he would win the title by 1 point. And Carlos would be given a bonus present on the first stage of the final day, as Colin's brother Alistair, who had made his way back up to 2nd by the end of the previous day, would retire in the most bizarre way possible, when his car would get beached into a ditch after having 0 visibility thanks to his fog lights deciding to go on strike. This meant that Carlos could take it even more easily in the final day and could afford to lose a minute to Bruno Cherry, which he would end up doing, dropping to 4th by the end of stage 26. With 2 stages to go, and with Carlos having a massive 2.5 minute gap to the privateer Subaru of Gregor Demevius, everything was looking good for him to clinch his 3rd world title. However, on the final stage of the rally, disaster would strike at the worst possible moment. Carlos throughout the stage was staying out of trouble in order to bring the car home and seal the title. However, with literally less than a kilometre of the stage to go, Carlos's engine would start to billow smoke from underneath his car and would begin to crawl to a halt. Carlos tried everything to nurse the car to the end of the stage, but his efforts were futile, as his car completely gave up the ghost, ending his rally in the most cruelest way possible. With him being unable to finish the stage, it meant in one of the luckiest ways possible, Tommy Mäkinen, who was preparing to get on a plane to go home, became the 1998 World Rally Champion. After it looked like his championship was over after day 1, the rally gods came to Tommy's aid at the last possible moment and gave him his 3rd consecutive title. Tommy was doing an interview with Finnish television before setting off to the airport when his brother phoned him to tell him that he had won the title. Tommy initially thought it was a prank, but quickly realised that it wasn't, and so at the last minute cancelled his flight so he could celebrate his third world title with his Mitsubishi team, who, thanks to Richard Burns winning the rally, had also won the manufacturer's title by 4 points ahead of Toyota. When you think of what is the weirdest way for someone to win the title, combined with what is the cruelest way for someone to lose the title, this is it right here. It was literally one of those moments that not even Hollywood could have scripted, and that is why, as a result, this title decider is still talked about to this very day. I can only imagine what on earth the fans attending that stage would have been thinking when they saw the number 5 Toyota ground to a halt, literally in sight of the finish. Carlos understandably was left emotional about the whole situation, as with everything he had achieved in his amazing and illustrious career, this was the one title, like with Mikko Hirvonen in 2009, that got away from him. However, unlike Mikko, this one was through no fault of his own, as it was a cruel twist of fate that cost him the title that day. Carlos would challenge for the title 2 more times after 1998, specifically in 2001 and 2003, but neither of those challenges came as close as the one in 1998, and it would also turn out to be the only time the Corolla would challenge for the title, as after being beaten convincingly by Tommy in 1999, Toyota would end up pulling out of the championship after the conclusion of that season, and wouldn't return to rallying until 2017, where it's fair to say since then they have had a lot more success, winning 6 consecutive drivers' crowns with 3 different drivers. And what's more ironic about their current run is the fact that the man that brought them back to rallying in the first place ended up being the same guy that stole the crown from Carlos's nose that very day in 1998, Tommy Mäkinen. The 1998 WRC title decider, one of the weirdest, cruelest, and some ways the greatest title decider of all time.